Darkness consumed everything beyond the frosted windows, a void without even the faintest glimmer of sun. It was the middle of the polar night, and the station's dismal corridors and howling winds provided a constant reminder of isolation. Located near the edge of the earth, the research station had endured countless winters. Yet this one was different. Though none dared speak it aloud, every member of the team felt an intangible weight mirroring the heavy black skies overhead. The total absence of sunlight stretched on for weeks, and restless nights piled up, eroding their sanity. Inside the station, a low hallway led to the common room. Over a single flickering bulb, a string of holiday lights dangled, attempting to offer a semblance of warmth. In the cramped space, Dr. James Hawthorne was hunched over a set of charts, analyzing temperature patterns. His eyes were bloodshot from insufficient sleep, his fingers trembling on the edges of the map. Next to him, Dr. Grace Kim rubbed her temples, wrestling with calculations of her own. Every so often, a strange clinking noise outside, likely chunks of ice shifting, disrupted her focus. These faint tremors played upon her nerves, like a constant, uneasy presence. "We've had extensive fluctuations in atmospheric data," Grace said, brushing a strand of dark hair out of her eyes. "But I can't trust these readings." She tapped her pen against the pages of her notebook. "I keep feeling like I'm making mistakes. Sometimes the numbers look like they're dancing around." James nodded, lips pursed as he glanced at her notebook. "It might be the instrument, or the mind playing tricks." He paused. "I haven't slept well in days either." They both knew stress could bend perceptions. The station was an echo chamber of anxieties, sound reverberating inside each researcher's head until every shift of wind carried doom. James tried to smile reassuringly, patting Grace gently on the shoulder, urging her to take a break. She gave him a half-hearted nod. In the lab, a short distance away, the rest of the team congregated. Vikram, a meteorologist whose easy grin had faded in recent days, seemed particularly restless. He hovered near the window, pressing his palm to the thick glass as he stared into the black void. Ingrid, stoic but meticulous, was double-checking radiation monitors, her hand trembling whenever the station's steel supports creaked. A new researcher, Elena, fiddled nervously with the angle of the overhead lamp. She was the youngest and had never experienced the unrelenting gloom of the polar night, but even the veterans were unsettled by this year's oppressive darkness. Dr. Rosa Vargas, the station's senior medical officer, had initially dismissed the team's mention of ominous feelings and nightmares. She attributed the restlessness to the typical seasonal affective depression that came from living in a perpetual night cycle. Yet Rosa couldn't deny that she was waking in the early hours, disturbed by lifelike dreams. She'd been dreaming of labyrinthine corridors in which familiar shapes lurked in corners, waiting. Just a dream, she told herself. But her pulse quickened each morning, steps unsteady when she left her cramped cabin. She'd heard the stories from older expeditions, tales of hallucinations or dark watchers at the edges of one's vision. In every historical account, the watchers were illusions, manifestations of the mind craving daylight. She wondered if the watchers this year might be real. The next day, with the perpetual night continuing to blur time, the wind raged even stronger. The station's communication lines had been down for 2 days. Stefan, the communications expert, had tried everything, rewiring the satellite transponder, cycling through repeated resets, but no luck. They were effectively cut off, no phone call or email able to leave the station. Everyone felt the tension. Days without sunlight were exhausting enough, but days without external contact made them all question, if something happened to them, who would know, and how would they escape? Late that evening, James retreated to the small lounge to try and read. He noticed Ingrid sitting on the couch, flipping through a book absent-mindedly. She wasn't reading it so much as using it as a shield from the creeping darkness. "Mind if I sit?" James asked gently. She shook her head. "No, it's okay." She shut the book, eyes rimmed red. "I keep hearing sounds in my cabin. They're like someone whispering, but there's no one there." James exhaled, recalling his own experiences. "It's the night, Ingrid. Our brains are starving for normal cues. We can't see the sun, and it's messing with our internal clocks. Ingrid nodded, though she offered no further response. A stale silence followed, broken only by the slight hum of the station's vents. James realized they were all dangerously exhausted. The rest of the team was scattered among the station's various rooms, hunched over their tasks, each battling invisible demons. In her cabin, Grace typed up notes about the temperature changes. Her mind drifted toward the events outside the station. Ice quakes, the shifting glaciers, the constant rumble outside made her heart pound. It was as if a beast scratched at the walls, seeking entry. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth, stifling a sense of dread. Her monitor flickered. The overhead lamp buzzed. She tensed. Grace was rarely prone to fear, but in this endless night, the simplest flicker of light could morph into a terrifying omen. Then, a sudden static crackle, momentary interference. Grace froze. Often, the station's electrical grid hiccuped during storms. But this noise was different, like a rasping breath in her ear, followed by a soft voice she couldn't decipher. She snatched off her headphones, wide-eyed, scanning the corners of her tiny room. In the swirling shadows from her lone desk lamp, nothing moved, yet a chill clung to the back of her neck. Had she imagined it? Hours ticked by, and the team regrouped in the common room for a meager dinner. With every passing day, the food supply looked less appealing. Cans of soup, freeze-dried vegetables, protein bars. Dr. Rosa Vargas set down a tray of mugs. "Hot chocolate," she said, her voice subdued. "Might help us sleep." Vikram stared at his mug. He didn't sip, just stared, as though he'd never seen a beverage before. "No appetite for anything," he muttered. Elena swallowed, eyes darting around. I still haven't adapted," she admitted, voice trembling. "I can't even focus on my tasks. I feel like I'm losing it." No one offered platitudes. They were all frayed. The only thing uniting them now was the shared knowledge that none of them had a decent grip on their reality. Stefan tried to lighten the mood. He raised his mug and offered a weak toast to communication lines coming back soon. Despite the bleakness, they clinked mugs. It felt like a collective gesture of fragile hope. When they drank, the sweet warmth did little more than break the chill that hung between them. One by one, they spooned soup from their bowls in near silence, hearing only the station's ventilation system moan overhead. After dinner, it happened again. That crackle over the loudspeaker. Although it had been silent for days since the communications failed, everyone froze in place. The overhead speakers squealed with static, then fell quiet. It repeated, rising in pitch. Stefan scrambled to check the source. Then, across every set of desk speakers, the same disembodied rasp echoed. "Is that a transmission?" Ingrid asked, her breathing ragged. "Or is it some glitch?" Stefan pressed his ear close to a battered speaker. I can't tell. It's like a broadcast loop, but I can't make out the words." He fiddled with the dial, and the static roared again. For an instant, they all heard a faint shape of a voice, drowned in the chaos. It could have said anything. Then it vanished, leaving only the station's humming lights and their collective unease. Rosa tried to defuse the panic. "Equipment can malfunction, especially in these conditions." No one voiced their agreement. Every malfunction these days felt like part of a larger, more sinister web. Though they scattered again to resume data collection, each member of the team was haunted by the possibility that somewhere, someone was trying to communicate. But with what purpose? Stefan eventually dozed in front of the main console, exhausted by endless attempts to repair the system. His dreams carried him to polar nights from previous expeditions. In that subconscious realm, his former colleagues appeared, pale-faced, mouthing warnings he couldn't decipher. He startled awake when Vikram, who had been pacing around in a nearby corridor, shook his shoulder. Stefan's heart thudded in his ears. "Storm's picked up," Vikram said solemnly. "We can barely hear ourselves think." Stefan listened. The station's metal frame howled. A trembling set in the floor, as if the entire building quaked beneath leaks of black sky. Coupled with this, he thought he heard a banging, like someone hitting the outside door. But maybe that was the wind. Nothing was certain anymore. Meanwhile, Ingrid and Grace met in the lab. They were behind on analyzing ice core samples, a vital part of their research. Ingrid slid a core sample beneath the microscope. "I'm seeing anomalies," she whispered, eyed to the lens. I can't quite describe it. The ice has fractal patterns that don't make any sense for this region." Grace leaned closer. "Let me see." She examined the sample. To her tired eyes, it almost appeared as if something moved within the ridges of the frozen water. "It looks normal," Grace eventually said, her rational mind reasserting itself. "We're just tired." Ingrid bit her lip and said nothing. She had the same suspicion. Their collective mental state was failing them. What if the ice wasn't the problem? What if they were seeing illusions, each one feeding off the next? The following night, Elena, plagued by insomnia, sat on her bed while flicking through a set of photographs she had taken from home. Memories of family, of bright beaches and warm sun. She barely recognized that sense of brightness anymore. Her entire reality had become four walls, flickering LEDs and an abyss beyond the window. She missed day. She missed the color of sunlight on her skin. She clutched one photograph to her chest, ignoring the sting of tears brimming in her eyes. Her mind conjured images of the corridor, dark shapes gliding in the corners. She was certain something lurked there, but every time she gathered the courage to check, she scolded herself for giving into paranoid fantasies. Elena hadn't yet turned off her bedside lamp when a sudden scrape jolted her to her feet. She waited, breath held. A minute later, the doorknob rattled. She rushed to the door, swung it open, to reveal an empty corridor. Only the station's overhead bulbs illuminated the blank walls. She stepped out, pulse hammering, calling, "Who's there?" Silence. The faint hum of the heater. She backed into her room, shutting the door quickly. Then she pressed her forehead to the cold metal, eyes squeezed shut, waiting for her heart to slow. Eventually, with trembling hands, she returned to bed and tried to lose herself in the ancient hum of the vents. Though all tried to maintain scientific rigor, their daily logs began reflecting a downward spiral. James wrote about hearing footsteps behind him in the corridor, but each time he turned, no one was there. Grace described an indistinct figure at the edge of her vision whenever she worked alone in the lab. Ingrid confessed she had started to fear going to sleep at all, haunted by nightmares in which the station walls bled a liquid blackness. The staff doctor Rosa could do little except prescribe mild sedatives, but they weren't enough to bring restful sleep. Instead, the sedatives led them into heavier darkness, thick with nightmares. One evening, after dinner, Rose assembled everyone in the lab for a check-in. She spoke gently, lowering her eyes so as not to appear accusatory. "We're all experiencing signs of severe sleep deprivation, possibly coupled with hallucinations from living in constant darkness. I'm not diagnosing mass hysteria, but I am concerned. We need to monitor each other's mental health carefully." Vikram rubbed his face, grimacing. "So, how do we do that? We can't force ourselves to see illusions as illusions. They feel real." Grace's shoulders sagged in defeat. "We can only keep grounded, stick to our routines, journal, evaluate each other's data for mistakes." She locked eyes with the rest of the group. "We have to function as a team, no matter how strange things seem." The next day, the unexpected occurred. Midway through another blast of wind, the station's alarm system blared. Red emergency lights flashed across the corridors. James sprinted to the control room, heart pounding against his ribs. Others converged on him with wide eyes. "It's the external sensor array," Stefan said, nearly shouting over the wail. "It's registering a hatch opening on the north side of the station." Elena paled. "That's impossible. The hatch is sealed from inside and out. No one's left the station, right?" James disabled the alarm, but it continued to strobe anxiously. "We have to check it." Rosa turned pale. "I'll come with you." She grabbed a flashlight from the emergency kit. Vikram and Ingrid volunteered as well. Together, they trudged down the corridor, the alarm's screech echoing behind them. At the far end, they descended a short set of steps. The temperature plunged even further here. Their breaths billowed. The corridor ended at the station's north hatch. enormous and reinforced with a pressure lock to keep out the polar wind. When they reached it, they found the hatch sealed and secure. Vikram tested the locking mechanism. It hadn't been tampered with. Confused, they tried opening it to ensure all was intact. The mechanism refused to move. It was as if it had never been unlocked. Ingrid tapped the control panel. The sensor confirmed that the hatch had been accessed. Yet physically, it was obviously never opened. No footprints, Vikram observed warily, shining his flashlight on the ground. No sign of anything. They stared at one another. The alarm wailed overhead. Rosa pressed a button to silence it. The corridor fell into a cold hush. Other than their strained breathing, the station was silent once more. James felt the tension etched in his chest. "Let's go back," he finally said. "It's got to be a glitch." They retreated into the station's warmth, but no one relaxed. Ingrid lagged behind. She touched the cold metal of the hatch one last time, imagining the frigid air outside and the infinite night. Then she hurried after the others. Hours later, Ingrid was alone in her lab, rechecking the anomaly in her ice measurements. She forced her focus onto numbers, hoping logic would fight back the darkness. She put on headphones to reduce the station's incessant whistling. Clunk. She yanked off her headphones. The noise came from just beyond the lab's door. She called out with uncertainty. No answer. The overhead lights gleamed in the polished metal hallway, empty as always. Ingrid donned her headphones again and resumed her measurements. Then, another sound. Softer but distinctly there. She snapped off the headphones, stepping into the corridor. She felt something behind her, so sudden it verged on panic. Turning, she glimpsed a shape vanish around the corner. She didn't see details, just a fleeting suggestion of movement. She froze, uncertain if she should follow or run. Summoning courage, she walked down the corridor, the rubber soles of her boots squeaking on the floor. She reached the intersection and turned. Only more emptiness. She exhaled in confusion. Had she hallucinated? A new fear struck her. If she was indeed seeing things now in broad waking hours, was her mind unraveling completely? She almost didn't notice as James approached from behind, calling her name softly. She whirled, startled. The look on her face must have given him pause. "You saw something," James said. Not a question, but understanding. She swallowed, nodding once in silent admission. "I can't keep track of what's real." James placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, though she noticed his own hand trembled. "We'll try to get through this." That night, the nightmares reached a fever pitch. In the few short hours of uneasy rest, images plagued them all. The station's corridors stretching infinitely, monstrous figures looming in locked rooms. Shadows that whispered. Alina woke up drenched in sweat, hearing the station's foundation groan as if about to be ripped apart. Vikram dreamed he was outside in the unending polar night, wandering alone, so cold he felt shards of ice forming in his veins. Stefan swore he saw the face of a deceased colleague pressed against the glass window, screaming silently, though the air was too thin for the voice to carry. Amid these terrors, Dr. Rosa Vargas wrestled with a crippling sense of responsibility. As the only full-fledged medical professional, she was the one everyone counted on for reassurance, yet she was beset by her own illusions. Where she once found comfort in routine medical checkups, she now dreaded them, fearing that each pulse she measured would reveal something ominous. At breakfast, she approached the group. "I want to propose something," she said shakily. "We need to schedule watch rotations, pair up in twos so that we're never alone." Grace cleared her throat. "It's not a bad idea, but does that mean we get even less individual rest?" "We're already in short supply," Rosa nodded. "I know it sounds counterintuitive, but going anywhere alone is fueling these nightmares. We need to support each other. This is about our survival." James, Vikram, and the others agreed, not wholeheartedly, but with resigned acceptance. If watch rotations could curb their paranoia, if hearing a partner's voice in the corridor could stop these illusions, then it was worth sacrificing a few more hours of potential sleep. They drew up a schedule. Each pair would patrol the station, taking note of any sound, any flicker, any sign that something was amiss. But the station's endless night was merciless. Despite their new plan, tensions rose. Elena patrolled alone by accident one evening when her partner Stefan was so deeply asleep he didn't hear his alarm. She wandered the dark corridor and discovered droplets on the floor. At first her mind leapt to the possibility of a water leak, but after shining her flashlight she realized they were crimson. Blood. She knelt, heart pounding, to inspect. The sheen on the floor was thick like paint, but it couldn't have been paint. She followed the small trail, trembling, until it disappeared abruptly near a supply closet. Her breath caught, and she cracked open the supply closet door. A swirl of stale chemicals assaulted her nose, but no sign of an intruder or anyone hurt. Confusion flooded her. Before she could make sense of it, a flash of movement made her turn. Something flickered at the edge of her vision, gone an instant later. She couldn't face it alone. She sprinted back to the sleeping quarters, banging on Stefan's door until he groggily answered. "Blood," she gasped out. "I found blood in the corridor." Stefan's eyes widened. Together they returned to the spot. But the floor was spotless, no droplets, no red smears. Stefan's confusion matched Elena's rising panic. "No, it was right here," she insisted, kneeling again. "I saw it." He glanced at her pityingly. For a moment he appeared uncertain, then he touched her shoulder. "We're all living in illusions. Let's go get Rosa." They found Rosa and explained. She accompanied them, scanning the corridor carefully. Nothing. She touched Elena's forehead, checking for fever. Normal. With an exasperated sigh, Elena realized she might have conjured the blood from her imagination. She felt tears burning the corners of her eyes, but she forced them back, muttering an apology. Rosa attempted a comforting grin, though her concern was obvious. Days later, the cause for alarm shifted from illusions to a tangible crisis: food shortage. Reviewing the inventory, Ingrid discovered that their supplies were lower than expected. During the last resupply drop before the storms, something must have gone wrong. The rations wouldn't last if they remained stranded for too many more weeks. "This can't be right," James said, studying the inventory list in the supply room. "We should have enough dried goods to get us through the season." "Well, we don't," Ingrid said grimly. "We've got to ration even more, smaller portions." Hunger and fatigue, an even more demoralizing combination, took hold. Some nights, the gurgle of stomachs rumbled in the silence, an infuriating reminder that they were wearing down physically as well as mentally. And outside, the unbroken blackness of the polar night continued. One afternoon, or perhaps afternoon only by the clock, since it was eternally dark, Vikram spotted something near the station's northern perimeter from a small porthole. At first, he thought it was a trick of shadows. Then he called James to look. There was a silhouette trudging across the ice, heading toward the station. Could it be a wandering polar researcher in dire need of help? Or perhaps an illusion? James radioed the control room. Silence. The figure remained in place, apparently gazing back. Then, in the swirl of wind-blown snow, it vanished. James and Vikram never established whether it was real. They watched the spot for minutes afterward, but saw only drifting snow. Another sign of their fracturing minds? The tension finally broke one restless night when Vikram, on watch with Grace, had a sudden outburst. They were patrolling the corridor, footsteps echoing off metal walls, when Vikram whipped around and pressed Grace to the wall. "You see it, don't you?" he hissed, urgent. "That shadow at the far end, right there. Someone's standing there." He pointed wildly at a dark corner. Grace tried to speak calmly. "Vikram, look at me. There's nothing there." He shook her shoulders. "You're lying. I know you see it." Fear flashed in his eyes. For a moment she worried he might hurt her. She pressed her hands firmly on his forearms. "Listen to me. Look at the corner. It's empty." Vikram's breathing came in ragged bursts. He released her slowly, turning back to the corner. Empty indeed. With a shudder, he rubbed his face, stepping away as though he'd been burned. He mumbled an apology, eyes glimmering with tears of panic. Grace coaxed him back to the main lounge. They found Rosa, explained what happened in halting words. Vikram, humiliated and frightened, asked Rosa for stronger sedatives. She reluctantly provided them, aware that sedation might worsen his nightmares, but equally determined to keep him from tipping over the edge. The team members retreated to whatever corners of the station gave them a shred of comfort. James sat in the radio room, scanning frequencies. Stefan resumed fiddling with the defunct communications system, trying random sequences of commands, hoping to somehow break through. Ingrid remained in the lab, reading studies on the psychological effects of polar isolation. Elena locked herself in her cabin, clutching her family photos, vigorously denying the illusions she had seen. Rosa performed paramedical tasks like rechecking the meager medicine supply, filling out health logs and trying to stifle her own dread. One by one they slipped further. The nightmares devoured them from the inside. Time lost meaning. The overhead lights flickered ominously and the howling winds outside refused to relent. Everyone's eyes were rimmed with the dark circles of exhaustion. Whenever they attempted sleep, they drifted into a suffocating realm of terror. In the corridor, it was not uncommon to see someone muttering to themselves, staring wide-eyed at corners only they could see. Eventually, the tension erupted into a catastrophic evening when the storm outside pounded so powerfully that the electricity sputtered. The lights dimmed, then clicked off. Emergency lamps cast sporadic, flickering beams across the station's corridors, casting long, ghastly shadows. The radio control console died with a final beep, leaving Stefan cursing in frustration. The station descended into near-deckness. If the polar night had been smothering before, now it was absolute. Ingrid shouted from the lab. "The power grid is failing. I don't know if we can keep the generator going without manual restarts." James sprinted to the generator room with Grace, stumbling through the corridors illuminated only by their flashlight. The floor trembled with each gust of wind. They reached the generator room, shining lights on the massive machine. Alarms blinked on its display, indicating partial failure. While Grace fumbled with the controls, James heard a scrape behind them. He turned his flashlight to the door. For an instant, he saw a tall shadow slip away into the hall. "Grace, did you see?" he began, but she was engrossed in the generator's meltdown. Tension thrummed in his veins. In the darkness, the illusions multiplied. The wind outside sounded like a host of voices chanting. Each researcher heard a private chorus of horns, voices calling their names, urging them into the blackness. Doors rattled. The vents wept. In the distant corners, something lurked without shape, playing with their sanity. Then came a metallic groan, followed by gasps and a jarring crash. The station shook, and part of the ductwork overhead collapsed. A wave of dust and debris rained into the corridor near the living quarters. Elena, who had been passing by, let out a screech as she barely dodged it. The clamor deafened them. For several minutes, no one could speak, hearts pounding. Rosa rushed over to Elena, eyes darting in fear. Elena was unhurt but trembling, tears streaming down her cheek. They had to unite once more and gather in one place. By flashlight, they huddled in the main lounge, the generator's feeble hum the only thing keeping them from total blackness. Stefan's voice was unsteady as he spoke. "We need to fix that structural damage, otherwise we'll lose air pressure, or worse." Rosa nodded, but no one moved. They were caught in a deeper fear. Each person felt the weight of an unseen presence, as if the station itself had become malevolent. No one dared question whether that presence was real or a final product of their collective nightmares. At last, James spoke. "Let's do it together," he said firmly. "We move in pairs, gather tools, fix the collapsed duct, and get the generator stable. That's our best chance." They organized themselves, venturing cautiously through the station with battered flashlights. The gloom pressed in on all sides. As they worked to seal the breach, they heard rustling footsteps behind them, a phenomenon without source or explanation. After an hour of tense labor, they managed to prop up a temporary support for the collapsed duct and reaffirm the station's structural integrity. Exhausted, they retreated again to the lounge, relieved to still be alive. Eventually, the generator shuddered back to partial operation, providing dim overhead lighting. No one cheered, they were too depleted for that. Instead, they sank into chairs. Some buried their faces in their hands. Others stared blankly at the flickering lights. The night, This endless night remained unbroken, as if it would never cede today. Rosa rubbed her arms for warmth. "We're not going to last much longer in this state," she said. She surveyed them, the exhaustion etched into every face. "We need a miracle. We need contact with the outside world." James managed a weak nod. "The storm might let up soon, then the satellite link. It might come back. We just have to hold on." He didn't sound convinced, though his words tried to grant a small spark of hope, and so they waited in the suffocating darkness, each breath taut with fear. The illusions didn't vanish, but their unity in repairing the station had slightly eased the burden of solitary terror. Perhaps they could endure another night, then another, until the sky began to lighten again, if it ever would. Still, in that dim lounge, no one spoke of the shapes glimpsed in doorways or the whispers that seemed to resonate from every vent. Some illusions were too terrifying to be voiced, for now all they could do was keep each other close, fight to stabilize the battered station, and hope that somewhere in the swirling blackness outside, dawn might eventually break. A silent vow formed among them, not to let the night devour their minds entirely. They clung to one another, waiting for any sign of rescue or the merest ray of light that could dispel the endless night.